Recently, I made a change to my camera setup that might come as a bit of a surprise to you. Instead of carrying my Leica M6 everywhere I go, I tend to grab my Lumix S5 IIx with a budget 40mm TTArtisan lens. And yeah, that was as unexpected for me as it might be for you. Yeah, I didn't see that one coming at all, but surprisingly, this is what happened. But well, let me explain why I have a tendency to do that and why this is probably the better choice. So let me say up front that I didn't sell my Leica. I still have it. I still love it more. I still like film photography more. I just have a tendency to grab the Lumix more often, especially if I don't know exactly whether I will be shooting pictures or not. And I guess with that context, it makes a little bit more sense. The concept of an everyday carry camera was always a bit of a strange one for me, because I couldn't really see why I would take a cheaper, lighter, not as capable camera when I could just take a really good one. And since I had a Leica, this was always the camera that I took with me since I bought it in 2014. To me, it seemed strange that someone would spend more for a Fuji X100 than I ever paid for my Leica, because I got really lucky with it and bought it at a time when film photography wasn't as popular as it is now. And yeah, for me, it wasn't really that much of an expensive camera in the end. And those little Fuji cameras that everyone seemed to be carrying around at the same time didn't seem all that enticing to me. One of the reasons was, of course, that when I bought my Leica, film was a lot less expensive than it is now. Back then, you could still buy 3 rolls of Kodak Gold for about €7, which is, compared to now, quite cheap. Now, a single roll of Kodak Gold costs €10. So back then, it made a lot more sense to just take any picture on it because it wasn't all that expensive in comparison. Now, if you take a silly picture on film, then you're wasting money because it is quite expensive now, especially if you shoot color film. So lately I've been overthinking the pictures that I've been taking with my Leica because every single frame seemed to cost a lot of money all of a sudden because prices have exploded so much. And that kind of defeats the purpose of carrying a camera everywhere, because then you're overthinking every shot and it's not really the same experience anymore. Back when I started shooting with my Leica, I was not thinking too much about every single frame and I was just doing whatever I wanted with it. And now I find that I'm a lot more careful with the shots I take. I don't like wasting so much film anymore, and that means I shoot entirely differently with it now than I did 10 years ago. Another reason why this everyday carry camera concept didn't really apply to me is that I don't really have any reason to go anywhere that isn't taking pictures. Most people who use these kinds of cameras have places to be, jobs to go to, and all of these sorts of things, while I work from home, and if I go outside, then it's usually to take pictures and not to commute to work or go out with friends, or sometimes I do that too, but compared to my dedicated photo walks is relatively rare as an experience. So the small light camera that doesn't get in the way would just not get used very much. For me, the only reason to grab a camera like that would be when I'm running errands, for example, or while I'm out with friends, or in a situation where I can't really concentrate on taking pictures. In this situation, something like the Leica is actually quite difficult to use because there are so many things that you can do wrong. It's a fully manual camera. You have to focus manually and do all the settings manually too. And that means that if you don't pay attention, you might do it wrong. So you have to concentrate a bit, and that can sometimes get in the way. In such situation, a camera like that would make sense, but for me, it's not a very common occurrence. So if I wanted to have a camera like that, it would have to be a camera that I don't spend too much money on as another thing to buy, because I'm just not gonna be likely to use it all that much. So in the end, I started looking through my camera shelf and thought about all the different cameras that I could use for this purpose. And I think the most obvious choice for me would be the Olympus E-PL3, which I used to shoot before I bought my Leica. It's a small camera and the lenses are also very small because the sensor is just smaller than full frame. I used to shoot with this camera a lot, maybe around 2 years. I shot exclusively with it pretty much, and it's a great camera for street photography and I'm happy with the results. But there were some downsides to it, one of them being that one of the lenses that I used most commonly, the 20mm Lumix lens, is actually quite slow in autofocus, and I had this problem that I would take 3 shots to have one in focus, and even then I would still miss some shots because the autofocus on that lens is just atrocious. I really love the rendering, but well, it's not extremely reliable and it was getting very frustrating, which was one of the reasons why I bought the Leica in the first place. And it's also why I haven't really used that camera since I bought the Leica. Going back to this camera would have seemed a little bit strange, like a step backward in a way. And I think that by now my shooting habits have changed quite a bit too. The little Olympus doesn't have a viewfinder, and a Leica, a rangefinder camera, is obviously very viewfinder focused, and my habits are just that I use a viewfinder. Also because in the glare of the Spanish sun, you're not able to compose with a screen. It's just impossible. You won't see anything on it. You can add a viewfinder to the Olympus, but it goes on the hot shoe for the flash, and that's where I normally put my GoPro, which makes making these videos a little bit more difficult. And that was definitely a consideration in not choosing this camera for this purpose. This is of course a niche concern. Not everyone makes photography videos. I do though, and it is part of the way I take pictures, also because it helps me improve the picture taking process too, and I can look back at what I missed, for example, in the footage. And it's just something that I've become used to by now, and I don't want to miss it just so that I can have a viewfinder. It's a bit of a strange one, I know, not a great reason for just plain photographers, but for me, as someone who also makes YouTube videos, that's an important concern. Another camera that I tried out for this purpose, but then in the end didn't use all too often, is the Lumix GX80. And that's a great little camera for street photography. It's really lovely, but at the same time, there are still some things that are wrong with it. One of them is that the viewfinder that it has is actually so bad that it might as well not have a viewfinder. It has this rainbow fringing and it just makes your eyes hurt after a while. I don't use it very often when I use this camera, and I often just shoot it from the hip, and I don't really compose my shots with it any more than I do with the E-PL3. Another thing that I don't particularly like is the video on it. It is okay for the cameras of the time, but it doesn't have any log profiles, and I do find the colors a bit of a struggle, not only for video but also for pictures. For black and white, it's a great camera, but for pictures, I tend to struggle a bit, and I would much prefer it to have different colors. So in the end, I don't really use it all that much for this everyday kind of purpose, and only go on dedicated photo walks with it when I know that I will be shooting black and white, and I also know that maybe I don't need video, because otherwise I will end up wasting my time with shooting lots of footage that I won't use in the end because I find it so hard to integrate into what I do. And even if I were to use it to film myself, which I sometimes tried in the past, I did have problems with the autofocus a lot, so it just didn't live up to my hopes, I guess. It's great for street photography and I love it very much for the purpose, but not as the kind of thing that I always grab no matter what, because it's just the right thing for me to use. In the end, the main problem with these micro four thirds cameras is that they're a little bit too outdated if they are small enough for this purpose. In the past, micro four thirds cameras used to be very small, but nowadays all the cameras with the newest functions are actually just as big as full frame cameras. And if I have to carry a camera that is as big as a full frame camera, I might as well take a full frame camera. So that's a bit of a pointless exercise. And I really hope that sometime soon the Micro Four Thirds manufacturers will, you know, do their jobs and design the camera and the way it's meant to be in this format. We just want a small little camera that has all the latest functions. Is that really so hard to do? There are rumors now that OM Systems is working on an update of the pen line, which will hopefully solve this issue. And I also think that if OM Systems makes such a move, then Lumix will have to follow. And I really hope that that works out and that we will see nice small Micro Four Thirds cameras very soon that can fill this niche a bit better than what we have on offer right now. All these old cameras take okay pictures if you don't need colors too frequently, but they're not really that suitable anymore if you also do video. And I guess this is what makes the Fuji X100 series so popular and why other people like it so much, because it also has good video on it and the image quality is decent enough, and the colors have also something going for them, which are all these Fuji film recipes with which you can have presets that make the editing a lot faster. And this is probably the appeal of these cameras. The reason why I don't really like those kinds of cameras is because the lens on them is fixed. They tend to have reasonable lens choices, 28mm, 40mm, 35mm, and if you're into that sort of thing, then that makes total sense. But I'm the kind of person who gets bored with lens choices at some point, and just shooting one lens for the entirety of my time would be a little bit much for me. And I actually tried this out when I first got my Leica, because I only had a 35mm lens for it. I just couldn't afford anything else. So I was shooting this lens for a year. And then I was so thoroughly bored of it that I got myself a 50mm and shot a lot more with that for a while because I just needed change. And if I buy a camera like this as an everyday carry camera, then I think I would like to be able to change lenses, because I will get bored, I know myself. And then that would mean buying a whole new camera with a different lens. And that's maybe not the right choice then. Interestingly, my husband actually has one of those X100 cameras. I think it's the first one, perhaps, X100 or X100S, I'm not quite sure right now. And personally, I don't really get along with it. He likes it and he uses it a lot when he travels, but I personally have never had any good results with it. I tried it out a couple of times, but I can't even show you any results from it because I didn't like the pictures, and I had a lot of struggles with the autofocus too while I was shooting street photography, and it just didn't work out for me. In the end, I didn't get any pictures that I liked, and I didn't use the camera again, which says everything, I suppose. It's just not the kind of thing that I seem to enjoy. Maybe I would get along with one of these newer versions of it better, but I just didn't like the original, and I don't feel tempted by the new ones because I never really got along with the original version. So buying something like that wouldn't really be sensible for me. Also, the Ricoh GR line and the Leica Q line are not really for me either. The Leica Q already because it's way too expensive for me. And the Ricoh doesn't have a viewfinder either, and yeah, no, not really my kind of thing. Although I know that a lot of people like these kinds of cameras, I'm just not the right person for them, I suppose. So in the end, I ended up choosing my Lumix S5 IIx for this purpose, which is a really strange and just developed out of just my habit, because I actually didn't buy this camera for photography. I bought it for video, and I ended up using it a lot more for photography than I expected. So this has somehow become the camera that I grab when I don't know whether I'm gonna take pictures. I just use that for some reason, and I don't really know why, except that it does certain things exceptionally well. One thing that I really like about it is the colors, and it has this fantastic function called real-time LUT, which is the equivalent of these Fuji film recipes that I already mentioned. You can apply these as presets, and then you don't really have to worry about color so much while you're editing the pictures, and it just speeds things up so much. If I'm going to be carrying a camera everywhere and I might just be taking random pictures, then I don't want to spend ages editing them to perfection. It's just not the kind of thing that I would waste my time on, because I'm not really the kind of photographer who enjoys editing all that much. I like to shoot pictures, editing them, nah. The other function that I really like is actually a video function, and that's the IBIS, the image stabilization that is integrated into the body. And that means that I don't have to take a gimbal or a tripod to get stable video shots. And I like to grab video in between and use them for my photography videos. And with this camera, I just have to switch modes and I can shoot really great video on it, and that's really fantastic. It feels like a truly hybrid camera in this way, and that makes it so that it's just very seamless for me to use in my workflow. So in the end, I think it was the video that compelled me to take this camera all the time. And then I just ended up shooting pictures on it too. And it became my everyday carry camera, although that was really not the plan, since this is a quite big and heavy camera. It's not really the kind of camera that you'd think you'd take everywhere, because it is big. But that's how it has evolved somehow. The only downside it has is that the manual focus aids are a little bit slow. And I've spoken about this in another video just recently that I made about the TTArtisan 40mm lens and shooting street photography on this camera. And the manual focusing aids are just a little bit too slow to be suitable for that genre. And I shoot a lot of street, so an everyday carry camera should be good for that. In the end, it was the reason why I gravitated towards this 40mm TTArtisan lens, because autofocus makes that a lot more suitable for these everyday kind of situations where you can't focus on the camera too much. It might seem strange that I would go from a 35mm Zeiss lens to a 40mm budget TTArtisan lens. I mean, those are very like apples and oranges, very different lenses. But I actually also shoot a lot of vintage lenses, especially very swirly ones and very characterful lenses like the Helios or my Voigtlander 50mm f1.1 lens. My Canon 50mm f1.4 lens also goes in that direction, and it has become somewhat of a habit of mine to shoot these kinds of lenses, and the TTArtisan actually fits very well in that kind of category. The autofocus is a little bit slow in comparison to the native lens that I tried, but it still works really well for my purposes, and I didn't have as much trouble with it as with the 20mm Lumix lens on Micro Four Thirds, which was quite annoying to use, whereas this lens is actually quite fun to shoot. And I even made an entire video about how a little bit of unreliability in a camera can actually go a long way to making photography a bit more fun. And this lens is definitely a lens that suits this style of shooting a lot more, because it isn't perfect and it doesn't always deliver, and it's just fun that way. So of course this setup isn't particularly small, even with a small lens like the TTArtisan lens, but I don't think that pocketability is actually a concern when girls' pockets are so small anyway. You can't get even a pocket camera in them, so it doesn't really matter so much. I would prefer it to be smaller, of course, but this is just how it ended up. And there's actually one option that I've been considering that would alleviate the size problem a little bit, which is the Lumix S9. And that has a rangefinder style body, and it has a bit of a better form factor for this style of everyday shooting. But at the same time, I don't really think it's the right camera for me still. Since I already mentioned with the Olympus, the viewfinder is quite important for me, and the S9 doesn't have one, and that means that I would have to change my style of shooting quite a bit. I mean, nowadays camera sensors are quite big and produce big images, which means that cropping isn't really such a big deal. So even if I don't get the framing quite right, and I can't really compose with a viewfinder, it doesn't really matter so much because I can just crop after the fact and I won't lose that much image quality in a way that matters. There's more stuff wrong with the camera. For example, it doesn't have a mechanical shutter, which makes it somewhat unsuitable for shooting under artificial lighting. Nowadays there's all this LED lighting everywhere and you definitely can get banding with it with an electronic shutter. So I'm not really sure it's the right choice for me. I'm still thinking about it because the form factor of the body makes a lot of sense and it also has all the functions that I enjoy about the S5 IIx so much. So I do think that it is a reasonable option. I don't know, with this kind of camera I would have to shoot from the hip even more or without composing, and that's not really the style that I have developed in the last 10 years. It would be quite a departure from what I've been doing and I'm just not really sure about it. So how does my Leica still fit into this? Well, I do still take my Leica out for dedicated photo walks a lot and I enjoy using it still, and I use it whenever I can and find it suitable for whatever I'm shooting. But it's not the camera that I use all the time anymore, mainly because it's a little bit too expensive and sometimes it's also just gets in the way because it's this all manual experience. And sometimes I'm just too tired to shoot all manual, and then an automatic camera is quite nice to shoot. I mean, imagine for example a situation where I'm handling several shopping bags and a camera. I don't think a fully manual camera is the perfect choice for that situation. I've recently been taking my camera out while we were doing shopping and so on. And I certainly wouldn't have taken any shots with a Leica in that situation because I wouldn't have enough hands free for something like that. So now the Leica is something that I use much more deliberately and choose to take out rather than have with me at all times. And that also kind of makes sense because it is a much more expensive camera than it used to be. It has appreciated in value quite a bit, and sometimes I do feel a bit strange about carrying around such an expensive camera. So I'm a little bit more careful with it. I don't take as many pictures with it because it's expensive and, well, things have changed and maybe even my style of shooting is changing too. I mean, I'm shooting more autofocus lenses and using more digital cameras, and it's just a departure from what I used to do. And I didn't see it coming, really. That was not the plan when I bought the S5 IIx. It was really just for video. But this is what happened, and I thought I'd share it because it's an interesting development and not something that I would have expected since, I mean, shouldn't I be choosing the Leica over the Lumix? I don't know. Maybe it's also the novelty of it. I mean, I've had the Lumix for 2 years by now and the Leica for 12, so maybe I'm just used to having a Leica now. Weird. Definitely strange things happening, and I don't know what you think about it. Anyway, these were just some thoughts about everyday carry cameras and how they fit into my style of shooting and why I'm not using them and why I choose a big heavy camera instead. And I just wanted to see what you guys think about it because things are still changing and I'm still considering changes to my camera systems and seeing what I can find in this direction. Do you think that maybe I should give the Fuji another chance? I don't know. I'm still thinking about all of these things and I hope I have some answers at some point. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. It really helps out my channel, so I would really appreciate it. In this case, I would suggest that you subscribe to my photography channel because this is where these videos live and I only share them with the main channel so that they get the widest possible reach. A big shout out also to my Ko-fi supporters. You make all this possible and I'm really grateful for it. If you also want to support what I do, then you can head over to Ko-fi or maybe watch another video. There's actually an entire photography playlist that you can watch here. And I hope I see you soon for another video. Bye!